Hey y'all, and welcome back to Libris from the books. Today's episode is about answering your questions, some of your questions, from the Understanding Rhetoric introduction. Just so you know, as we get started, I do not have answers to all of your questions because some of you ask questions that are really questions for the authors of the book, and I am not one of them, so I can't really speak for them. And there were questions that I wasn't sure what exactly was being asked, which means that I didn't really know what kind of an answer to give. So I'm going to answer several of the questions that were asked. And then if yours is not on here, don't feel bad about it. You can always send it to me again if it's something that I really should be answering. But remember, if you're asking questions about the authors, about their motivations, about their arguing with one another, I really can't answer those because I'm not part of that team. So let's dive into some of these questions. The first one that I'm going to answer, why write a textbook in a graphic novel or comic book format? This is a really good question. It's not a traditional format. We're not used to seeing textbooks in this fashion, and many of us are used to seeing graphic novel, comic books, those kinds of things as like free time entertainment, not very serious. So why write a textbook in this format? One person even conjectured that maybe it's a way to, kind of keep up with the young people, be hip, but it's not. Although that might be part of it. Again, I can't speak entirely to their motivations, but I can speak to why this format might make a good textbook. And that speaks to one of the reasons, or some of the reasons why I chose this book over the other English 101 textbook options that we had. So Understanding Rhetoric, this graphic guide to writing, offers things that a traditional textbook does not offer. One of the things that it does, and it becomes more and more apparent as you read the book, throughout the semester, is it illustrates every concept that it's trying to teach. A traditional textbook tells you everything, and it might provide an image here, a graph there, a chart over there. It may have colorful headings and maybe even some bullet points and outlines and questions and things like that, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that format. But the one thing I think that Understanding Rhetoric brings that the other books don't is that the way it's designed, the design of each page, the fonts that are chosen, the images that are there, the layout of the different panels, all of that demonstrates the concepts that are being taught in that section. So it does something visually that we don't get in other textbooks. Now, why is that important? Because we live in a very visual world. We are constantly seeing images. We're on Instagram looking at photographs. We're watching television or YouTube videos, of all different kinds. We're playing video games. We're seeing the signs and the posters and the billboards all over the place. We live in a visual world. We encounter these visual images and that every day, multiple times a day. And using those images as a teaching method is good, and it also teaches us how to read the images that we see each day. So I hope that gives you a little insight into why this format. Is it the best format? Maybe not for everyone. Is it a good format? Yes. Is it different? Yes. Is it dumbed down? No. Which gets into this next question. How does being written as a graphic novel or a comic book affect the information it needs to give as a textbook? This textbook, Understanding Rhetoric, has all of the information that any of our other textbooks has. In fact, in some cases it has more because it uses a lot of the rhetorical terminology. It gives you history lessons. As we're reading this week in Why Rhetoric, we're learning about the history of rhetoric. We're learning about the ancient Greek philosophers, particularly Plato, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who developed rhetoric as a form, as a tool, and even debated about rhetoric, what it was and what it should be. And into Cicero in the Roman Empire, Cicero's development of rhetoric, and then going on forward into modern interpretations and understandings of rhetoric. Some of the textbooks that we've used in the past haven't even used the term rhetoric, let alone just defined it in the ways that we get in this book. And you'll see in other issues in the book, we learn a lot about Frederick Douglass, and we learn about some other issues and instances in our history and in the world, ideas that have been developed. So the information is here. It is all in this book, and it is not dumbed down in any way. It's just the presentation of it is different than we're used to seeing. But again, these visuals, the images, learning to read the images along with the text can give us a richer and deeper understanding than we might have if we're just left in a traditional textbook. And I don't know about you guys, but when I have a traditional textbook, I tend to pay attention to the headings, the bullet points, and any, I guess, reflection or review questions and summaries. I don't read every single word of the text. With understanding rhetoric, it's kind of important to read the words in order to really get the full understanding of what the book is trying to teach. And do the authors know that comic books can be difficult for some people to read? Well, I'm not one of the authors, so I can't fully speak for them, but I would assume as educators they do know that comic books can be difficult for some people to read, just as regular textbooks can be difficult for some people to read. For some people, this comic book option is actually better. And there are many reasons why that I don't really feel qualified completely to get into. But for some people, this Understanding Rhetoric, the graphic guide, is better than a traditional textbook. And for others, it's more challenging. Other people are distracted by all of the things that are going on a page, and they have to learn to kind of dim it down for themselves. Not dumb it down, but dim it down, meaning to focus in on one little bit at a time and kind of block out some of the extras. And so, yeah, and I know as an instructor that it can be difficult for some people to read. I do understand that. I do understand that there are going to be students who, I have had students who have not enjoyed this book because of the difficulties that they have in reading this kind of book. And, you know, I feel for them. But the thing is, they're used to being on the other side of that, where they're used to the textbooks that are easy for them to read. But there are other people who really struggle through those traditional textbooks, and this is something that gives them an opportunity to kind of shine in this area. So if you find this a difficult book to read, embrace that. Think of it as a good thing, as a challenge, as something to exercise your mind and to get you to see things in a different way. What is the Walk the Talk page for? So the Walk the Talk page is the last 2 pages, really, of the chapter before the drawing conclusions exercises. And the Walk the Talk page functions the same way a chapter review page would function. So in a regular textbook, you often have a chapter review or a chapter summary page, at the end where it goes back through the main points of the chapter, or sometimes even sections reviews in a longer chapter. Well, Walk the Talk does that here. It goes back through the main points that you're supposed to get from the chapter and breaks it down, and it's got this kind of game board sort of theme. So you just follow the steps around the game board, and it gives you some examples of each thing that's being discussed in that issue. So the issue, the introductory issue, Walk the Talk page, it starts with who wrote this, and that we learned that in the beginning, and what's the purpose, who's the audience, what's the context, and the takeaway. So these are the things that we've learned in the introduction about rhetorical situations. So we can see that at the top it's titled Rhetorical Situations, and then we have those questions that we're asking about the rhetorical situation, and then in between each of those game pieces or parts on the game board, we have a conversation and that has some examples in there. And then when you get to the Walk the Talk page for issue 1, Why Rhetoric, it's a kind of a review of ethos, logos, and pathos, and it gives an example of some work that's being presented. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But anyway, use the Walk the Talk as kind of a review. It reviews the main pieces of information. And for some of you, you might want to use it as a preview. You might want to read the Walk the Talk page first to get an overview of the main things you're supposed to learn in that issue, and then go back and start from the beginning to read. All right, our last set of questions here have to do with visual literacy. What is visual literacy? Visual literacy is just like regular literacy, except it's with images. So regular literacy is the ability to read and understand written materials, to read and understand a book, to read and understand these slides, to read and understand your job application or an assignment sheet or your math directions or whatever it is. That's literacy. Visual literacy is the ability to read and understand images, to look at an advertisement, to see what's there, to see what argument is being made, what message is being communicated, to understand it and to know how to use it. So why is this important? Again, we have images around us all the time, everywhere. There are images everywhere, and we need to be able to understand them. We need to be able to look at them and read them and say, okay, I see what this image is showing. And even in the issue that we're talking about in Understanding Rhetoric, they were talking about how different, you can have the same photograph, and showing certain parts of it gives you a different understanding of the situation than showing the whole photograph. And we've seen that in many situations where maybe only part of a photograph is published in the newspaper, but if we saw the whole photograph and had a better context, we would interpret a situation differently. So visual literacy is important in knowing what is being shown and what does it mean. So why use the term reads well instead of interprets well? This is one of the questions that was asked, and the statement was made, you can't read an image. Well, actually, I disagree with you there. You can read an image. You can, just because we are taught that reading means reading words doesn't mean that's the only kind of reading there is. We use the term read in in association with body language, reading someone's expression. We have the phrase, read the room, right? So reading goes beyond just words on a page. And so if an image reads well, that means that the image is clear, that the message is clear, and that anyone who looks at it should be able to understand it without a whole lot of effort. It's just like if I say that this text that I'm looking at reads well. It means that it's well written, that it's easy to understand, that I don't have to work too hard to know what the writer is trying to say. A visual argument is simply an argument that's made with images of some sort. So when you are looking at, say, a political poster, what is the visual argument? You often have the words, but what are the images that are there? Are there logos, designs, photos, drawings? What are they, and how do they contribute to the argument that's being made? Advertisements, same thing. What is the argument? What are the creators trying to portray and make the viewers think or feel or do in response? That would be the visual argument. So visual literacy is something that obviously is very important in understanding rhetoric, because the whole thing is a graphic guide, and so being able to read the images along with the text is incredibly important, and not just for reading understanding rhetoric, but for reading much of the world around us. So I hope that this has answered some of your most burning questions about understanding rhetoric, about the introduction. I look forward to seeing the questions that you have for issue 1Y rhetoric and addressing those next week. So I will see you back here on the next edition of Ex Libris, and maybe I'll even be on camera that time. We'll see.